Call the police! That woman is destroying our property values! That's what HOA President Brenda Thornfield shrieked before dialing 911 on my wife for the crime of planting wildflowers in her own front yard. 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. My wife Patricia's kneeling in the dirt, hands deep in Colorado soil that smells like morning rain and possibility. She's wearing her rattiest gardening jeans, hair escaping from a messy ponytail. Across the street, Brenda stands on her chemically perfect lawn in full makeup and pressed khakis, jabbing her manicured finger like she's conducting an orchestra of outrage. The squad car rolls up. Officer steps out, takes 3 steps toward the dangerous criminal tending her columbines, then stops dead. His jaw actually drops. "Your Honor, Judge Blackwood." Brenda's clipboard hits the sidewalk with a plastic clatter. Her mouth opens and closes like a fish, gasping for air. Oh, did I forget to mention? My wife sentences criminals for a living. What would you do if your HOA Karen called cops on you for gardening? Drop your nightmare below. Where are you watching from? And does your neighborhood have one of these people? Let me back up and tell you how we got here. I'm Marcus Blackwood, 58 years old, retired from the Colorado Springs Fire Department after 32 years of running into burning buildings while sane people ran out. My wife Patricia. She's been a municipal court judge for 15 years, the kind who sentences drunk drivers and settles parking disputes with the patience of a saint and the backbone of a steel beam. We moved to Willowbrook Estates 3 years ago, looking for that peaceful retirement dream. You know the type of neighborhood curved streets named after trees that were cut down to build it. Houses that all look like they were designed by the same committee of beige enthusiasts. Mix of retirees like us and young families whose kids leave chalk art on sidewalks that somehow offend certain people. Our house? Modest ranch style, nothing fancy. Patricia fell in love with the big front yard because she'd been dreaming of a real garden for years. Court schedule never left time for more than a few potted plants on our old apartment balcony. Enter Brenda Thornfield. 62 years old, lives in the biggest house on Maple Ridge Drive. The one with columns that serve no architectural purpose except announcing that important people live there. Former real estate agent who treats the HOA presidency like she's running a small country. The kind of woman who irons her jeans and color coordinates her garden tools. Everything was fine for the first 2 years. We paid our HOA dues, kept our grass regulation height, didn't park RVs in the driveway. Patricia would wave at neighbors while jogging. I'd help folks jump their car batteries in winter. Normal suburban stuff. Then this spring, Patricia decided to replace our struggling Kentucky bluegrass with native Colorado wildflowers. We're talking columbines, Indian paintbrush, blanket flowers plants that actually belong here instead of grass that needs constant watering in a semi-arid climate. She spent weekends on her hands and knees, the sweet scent of lavender borders mixing with fresh-turned earth that felt like velvet between your fingers. That's when Brenda struck. I was drinking my morning coffee, savoring that first bitter sip while watching Patricia Deadhead spent blooms, when I heard the sharp click, click, click of high heels on our sidewalk. 7:30 a.m., and there's Brenda marching up our walkway like she's serving a warrant, wearing pressed slacks and enough perfume to choke a horse. "This landscaping violates our community standards," she announced, waving a piece of paper that looked like it came from a 20-year-old printer. "I'm issuing a $200 fine for non-conforming vegetation." Patricia stood up slowly, brushing soil from her knees. In her calm judge voice, she asked, "Which specific covenant does this violate?" Brenda's nostrils flared. Section 12.4 clearly states all landscaping must maintain community aesthetic standards. "Actually," Patricia said, still patient as sunshine, Section 12.4 only restricts dead or dying vegetation. These are healthy native plants. I know what I meant when we wrote these rules. And there it was. The moment we realized we weren't dealing with someone who'd made an honest mistake. See, Patricia had done her homework. Spent 3 evenings reading every page of the HOA covenants with the same attention she gives complex legal briefs. The rules only mention removing dead plants, maintaining grass at reasonable height, and keeping yards free of debris and unsightly storage. Nothing about plant types, nothing about aesthetic standards, nothing that would make a wildflower garden illegal. But Brenda had a pattern. Over the next week, we learned about 3 other families who'd been targeted. Frank Kozlov, 74-year-old Vietnam veteran, got fined $150 for growing tomatoes where his wife used to tend roses before she passed, said the vegetables were inappropriate for front yard display. Sarah Quinn, single mom working 2 jobs, paid $300 to make chalk art disappear from her own driveway after Brenda claimed it was unsightly temporary markings. Every family had something in common. They were either elderly, struggling financially, or just different enough to stand out in Brenda's vision of suburban perfection. Patricia set down her coffee mug that morning with the kind of quiet determination that makes seasoned attorneys nervous in her courtroom. "We're not paying this fine," she said. Brenda didn't take no well. 2 days after Patricia refused to pay, we got a certified letter that made our mailman apologize for delivering it. The return address was embossed because of course it was, and inside, the fine had magically doubled to $400. The letter claimed an emergency board meeting had been held to review our flagrant violation of community standards. Unanimous vote, according to Brenda's typed minutes. Enhanced penalties authorized. 10 days to pay or face a lien on our property. One problem, Patricia called every HOA board member that afternoon. "Emergency meeting?" Frank Kozlov's gravelly voice crackled through our kitchen speakerphone. "Hell, I didn't know about any meeting. Been in Denver visiting my grandson all week." Same story from 2 other board members. They'd never been notified, never voted, never even seen these magical meeting minutes. Turns out Brenda's unanimous vote involved exactly 3 people. Herself, her next-door neighbor Dorothy, and Dorothy's husband Carl, who spends most HOA meetings asleep in his lawn chair. Patricia had learned about HOA procedure requirements during a particularly boring municipal law seminar 5 years back, one of those mandatory continuing education courses where half the judges dozed off. Thank God she'd stayed awake for the section on homeowner association governance. Colorado requires written notice to homeowners at least 14 days before any fine can be imposed, plus a hearing where you can defend yourself. Brenda had done none of that, which meant her fine was about as legally binding as a grocery list. So Patricia filed a formal complaint with the Colorado HOA Oversight Division. Beautiful thing about having a judge for a wife, she knows which forms to file and exactly how to file them. That's when Brenda's surveillance campaign began. Every morning at 6 a.m. sharp, her white Lexus would cruise our street like a shark circling wounded prey. The acrid smell of her exhaust mixed with morning dew as she'd park across from our house, engine running, air conditioning blasting even in 70-degree weather. Click. A slightly brown blade of grass got photographed. Click. Garden hose coiled instead of hung on its hook. Click, click, click. Yesterday's newspaper, still in the driveway at 6:15 a.m., deserved a close-up. The sound of her car door slamming became our neighborhood alarm clock. Frank started timing his morning walks to coincide with her inspections, just to watch her scramble back to her car whenever he waved and called out, "Morning, Brenda. Getting your exercise?" But here's where Brenda made her first tactical mistake. While she was busy building her photo evidence collection against our wildflowers, Patricia was quietly building something much more dangerous. She started collecting stories. Knocked on doors during her evening jogs, chatted with neighbors at the grocery store, made mental notes every time someone mentioned HOA troubles. The pattern was uglier than we'd imagined. Frank's tomato plants weren't his first violation. Brenda had previously fined him $50 for displaying his Purple Heart license plate holder, claiming it was non-standard vehicle decoration. Only backed down when Frank's veteran buddies started asking pointed questions about supporting the troops. Sarah Quinn's chalk art? That was violation number 3. First came a warning about her children's bicycles being improperly stored in their own driveway. Then a $50 fine when her 6-year-old left a soccer ball on the front lawn overnight. Each time, Sarah paid rather than fight because single mothers working 2 jobs don't have time for legal battles. The elderly widow on Pine Street got cited for excessive bird feeding after Brenda decided her small bird bath attracted pest wildlife. Translation: Brenda didn't like the sound of morning songbirds interrupting her backyard phone calls. Every single target shared one thing: they were either vulnerable, different, or just unwilling to genuflect before Queen Brenda's suburban throne. Then came the mini twist that changed everything. While organizing all this information, Patricia discovered something that made her coffee mug pause halfway to her lips. She cross-referenced the dates of Brenda's violations with HOA board meeting minutes from the past 2 years. Every single fine had been issued during weeks when at least 3 board members were out of town. Brenda wasn't just making up emergency meetings, she was specifically timing her harassment campaigns for when no one could stop her. "Marcus," Patricia said that evening, her voice carrying the same quiet intensity I'd heard when she sentenced career criminals. "She's not just power hungry, she's calculating. This is systematic intimidation." The smell of fresh coffee and printer ink became permanent fixtures in our home office as Patricia built her counterattack one document at a time. Every photograph Brenda took, every violation notice she issued, every arbitrary rule she invented was being documented by someone who understood evidence collection better than most attorneys. Patricia was playing chess while Brenda was playing checkers. And Brenda had no idea she was about to lose her queen. A week after Patricia filed her state complaint, Brenda pulled out what she thought was her nuclear option, the architectural review process. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday, thick as a legal brief and twice as pretentious. Brenda was demanding that our wildflower garden undergo landscape modification approval through the HOA's Architectural Review Committee. According to her interpretation of the covenants, any change to existing vegetation patterns required advance permission from a 3-member panel. Here's the thing about architectural review committees. I'd learned this during my fire department days when we had to navigate HOA rules for emergency vehicle access. They're supposed to prevent your neighbor from painting their house neon pink or installing a 20-foot statue of Elvis in their front yard. They're not supposed to regulate what type of flowers you plant in dirt that's already been dirt for 15 years. But Brenda scheduled a hearing anyway. 48 hours notice, community center basement, bring all relevant documentation. Oh, and she was bringing an expert witness, some landscaping professional who would explain why native Colorado plants were somehow inappropriate for Colorado soil. Patricia hung up the phone after getting this news and smiled. Not her warm, greeting neighbor's smile, her courtroom smile, the one that defense attorneys learned to fear. She wants a hearing, Patricia said, opening our bedroom closet. Let's give her a hearing. Thursday evening, 6:30 p.m. The community center basement smelled like 50 years of potluck dinners and budget meetings, a musty combination of old coffee, industrial carpet, and the faint tang of mildew that no amount of Febreze could mask. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like dying insects, casting everything in that particular shade of institutional beige that makes you wonder if joy is even legal in municipal buildings. Brenda sat at a folding table with Dorothy and Carl, looking like she was chairing a corporate board meeting instead of discussing flower varieties. She'd brought a briefcase for a garden hearing in a community center basement. Patricia walked in wearing her full judicial robes. I'm talking the whole ensemble, black robes, perfectly pressed. Her name badge reading, The Honorable Patricia Blackwood, Municipal Court Judge. Hair pulled back in that severe bun she wears for sentencing hearings. She carried a leather briefcase that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment. The psychological warfare was immediate and devastating. Brenda's confident posture deflated like a punctured balloon. Dorothy started fidgeting with her reading glasses. Carl woke up for the first time in 3 years of HOA meetings and asked, Is she arresting somebody? Good evening, Patricia said in her official court voice, the one that makes public defenders stand up straighter. I understand we're here to discuss Colorado revised statutes regarding homeowner association authority over indigenous plant cultivation. Then she opened her briefcase and started laying out documents. Not just any documents, a full legal brief, complete with case citations, precedent analysis, and photographs of every plant in our garden with Latin names and ecological impact studies. Brenda's expert witness turned out to be Roger Pembroke, her real estate business partner who'd probably never identified a weed in his life. When Patricia asked about his qualifications, Roger mumbled something about 20 years in property management and understanding community standards. Mr. Pembroke, Patricia said, pulling out a field guide, can you identify the difference between Aquilegia caerulea and Aquilegia chrysantha? What now? Colorado's state flower versus its yellow cousin, both native columbines, both growing in my garden. Which one violates your community standards? Roger looked like a deer caught in headlights attached to a freight train. Well, it's not really about specific plants. Then what exactly are we reviewing? But the real mini twist came when Patricia casually mentioned she'd spent the afternoon photographing Brenda's own backyard. Turns out our HOA president had some interesting landscaping choices that somehow never required architectural review. Mrs. Thornfield, can you explain why your ornamental fence exceeds the 6-foot height restriction by 8 inches without requiring approval? Brenda's face went through several interesting color changes. That's decorative screening. It's different. And your decorative pond? Built without any architectural review process whatsoever? It's a water feature. What about your hot tub placement? According to these measurements, it violates the 15-foot setback requirement by approximately 4 feet. The scratch of Patricia's pen taking detailed notes was the loudest sound in that basement. Every word, every stumbled excuse, every contradiction was being recorded by someone who'd spent 15 years listening to people lie under oath. Frank had shown up to support us, along with Sarah and 3 other neighbors who'd been targeted by Brenda's violation spree. They sat in folding chairs like a jury, watching Brenda's authority crumble in real time. "This hearing is concluded," Brenda finally announced, when Patricia asked her to cite the specific covenant language that required architectural review for native plants. But Patricia wasn't done. "Actually, Mrs. Thornfield, I have one more question. When exactly did this Architectural Review Committee receive its legal authority to regulate indigenous vegetation?" Silence. The kind of silence that makes fluorescent lights sound like jet engines. After getting demolished in her own kangaroo court hearing, Brenda went straight for the neighborhood's wallet. The letter arrived exactly 1 week later, delivered to every house in Willowbrook Estates with the kind of official-looking seal that makes people's blood pressure spike. "Emergency Special Assessment Notice" was stamped across the top in red letters that screamed crisis. According to Brenda's calculations, the HOA's legal expenses defending against frivolous complaints and harassment from problem residents required an immediate $5,000 assessment from each household. Due within 30 days. No exceptions, no payment plans, no appeals process. The letter went on to explain how one selfish neighbor was forcing the entire community to bear the cost of legal battles that could have been avoided if certain people just followed the rules like everyone else. The woman was trying to turn our neighbors against us by hitting them where it hurts most, right in the retirement savings. But Brenda made one critical mistake. She called a mandatory neighborhood meeting to explain the assessment, and she scheduled it for the same community center basement where Patricia had just humiliated her architectural review committee. Sunday afternoon, 2 o'clock. The basement was packed tighter than a rush-hour subway car. Retirees who hadn't been to an HOA meeting in 5 years showed up clutching Brenda's assessment letter like evidence in a murder trial. Young families squeezed between folding chairs, bouncing toddlers who sensed the adult tension and responded with appropriate chaos. The air was thick with anxiety and the lingering smell of whatever church potluck had used the room that morning: fried chicken and green bean casserole, comfort food that wasn't comforting anyone today. Brenda stood at her folding table wearing a navy blue blazer that screamed, "Trust me with your money," flanked by Dorothy and semi-conscious Carl. She'd prepared a PowerPoint presentation about HOA legal expenses in a basement with a projector older than most of the residents. "Friends and neighbors," she began, her voice carrying that practiced real estate agent sincerity, "we're facing an unprecedented legal crisis because one household has decided to wage war against our community standards." She clicked to her first slide. Legal Defense Fund, $35,000 required. The number hung in that stale air like a death sentence for people living on fixed incomes. That's when Patricia stood up. She'd been sitting in the back row with me and Frank wearing jeans and a simple sweater, looking like any other concerned neighbor. But when she rose to her feet, something shifted in that room. Maybe it was her posture or the way she'd been taking notes on a legal pad, or just the quiet confidence that comes from years of commanding courtrooms. "Excuse me, Mrs. Thornfield," Patricia said, her voice carrying easily through the cramped basement. "Before we discuss assessments, could you clarify exactly which legal expenses we're covering?" Brenda's smile faltered. "Well, obviously, the costs of defending against your harassment campaign and frivolous state complaints." "I see. And which attorney is representing the HOA in this defense?" "We've retained Morrison, Burke & Associates for all HOA legal matters." Patricia nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting, because according to Colorado Open Records Act request I filed last Tuesday, the HOA has paid $47,000 to Thornfield Property Solutions over the past 2 years for various consulting services." A murmur rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. "Your company, Mrs. Thornfield. $47,000 for what services exactly?" Brenda's face was cycling through colors again. Those are legitimate property management consulting fees." "For what specific services? Because according to these invoices," Patricia held up a thick folder, "the HOA paid your company $8,000 for landscape consultation services during months when no landscaping work was approved or completed." Frank stood up next. "She charged me $50 for removing invasive weeds from my memorial rose garden. Turns out those invoices went to her company too." Sarah's voice carried from the middle of the room. My vegetable garden violation? She told me the fine would go to community beautification, but the check was written to Thornfield Property Solutions. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Retirees who'd been clutching assessment letters started clutching them for different reasons. Furthermore, Patricia continued, her courtroom voice now fully engaged, I'd like everyone to know that Mrs. Thornfield has been collecting fines and fees while the HOA's corporate status was dissolved 18 months ago due to unpaid state filing fees. Dead silence. The kind where you can hear your own heartbeat. What does that mean? Called out Mrs. Peterson from Pine Street. Patricia's voice was gentle but crystal clear. It means every fine, every fee, every assessment collected in the past 18 months has been deposited into accounts controlled by Mrs. Thornfield for an organization that legally doesn't exist. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder. Someone's phone rang and got hurriedly silenced. A toddler chose that moment to loudly announce he needed to use the potty. Brenda was standing at her folding table, mouth opening and closing like she was trying to speak underwater. Then Frank's gravelly voice cut through the silence. Lady, are you telling us you've been stealing our money? The basement erupted like a shaken soda bottle. Stealing? Brenda's voice cracked higher than a teenage boy's. I have worked tirelessly for this community. Every fee collected goes directly to maintenance and improvements. Then you won't mind showing us the bank statements, Patricia said calmly. That's when Brenda made her final mistake. She grabbed her briefcase, knocked over her folding chair, and stormed toward the basement stairs while shouting something about ungrateful neighbors and consulting her attorney. The slam of the community center door echoed through that basement like a judge's gavel. What Brenda didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Patricia had spent the previous week working with her paralegal friend Jennifer at the courthouse, diving deep into HOA corporate records and banking regulations that most people find more boring than watching paint dry. See, when Patricia filed that Colorado Open Records Act request, she wasn't just fishing for information. She knew exactly what she was looking for because she'd seen similar cases cross her bench. Small-time fraud usually follows predictable patterns, and HOA embezzlement has its own special flavor of stupidity. The smoking gun was actually sitting in plain sight at the Colorado Secretary of State's office. Every HOA in the state has to file annual reports, just like any other corporation. Miss 2 consecutive years, and your corporate status gets dissolved automatically. It's like forgetting to renew your driver's license, except the consequences involve thousands of dollars in potentially illegal fee collection. Brenda had missed filing in 2022, and 2023, and 2024. For 18 months, she'd been collecting money on behalf of an organization that, legally speaking, didn't exist anymore. Every fine, every assessment, every consulting fee paid to her company had been deposited into accounts she controlled personally, not corporate HOA accounts with proper oversight. But the financial fraud was just the appetizer. The main course was what Jennifer discovered when she cross-referenced Brenda's violation patterns with fair housing discrimination databases. Turns out Brenda's targeting wasn't random. She'd systematically gone after households that fit specific profiles. Elderly residents who might pay rather than fight, single parents too busy to research their rights, families who didn't fit her vision of suburban perfection. The pattern was so clear it looked like a discriminatory enforcement manual. Frank's Purple Heart license plate holder, Sarah's children's chalk art, the widow's bird bath, my wife's native wildflowers. Every violation had been carefully chosen to target people who were either vulnerable or different. Over $23,000 had disappeared into accounts only Brenda could access. Money collected from neighbors who trusted their HOA president to follow the law, while she was busy inventing rules that didn't exist and enforcing covenants for an organization that had legally ceased to exist. Patricia spread the evidence across our kitchen table that night like a general planning a military campaign. Bank records, corporate filings, violation notices, timestamps, photographs, everything needed to prove systematic fraud and discrimination. We could report this to the district attorney tomorrow, she told me, sipping her evening tea while reviewing the financial documentation. Brenda would probably plea bargain, pay restitution, get probation. But that doesn't help Frank get his memorial garden back. Doesn't compensate Sarah for the fear she felt every time she saw Brenda's car in her driveway. Doesn't fix the fact that this woman has been terrorizing our neighbors for 2 years. Patricia had that look in her eyes. The same expression I'd seen when she sentenced repeat offenders who showed no remorse for their victims. Justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about making sure the harm stopped and the community healed. So what do you want to do? She smiled, and this time it wasn't her courtroom smile or her neighborly smile. This was her Marcus, you're going to love this smile. I want to give Brenda Thornfield exactly what she's been demanding all along, a community that follows the rules, all of them, including the ones about fraud, embezzlement, and discriminatory enforcement. The taste of Patricia's chamomile tea mixed with the sweet smell of justice being carefully planned. Outside our kitchen window, the wildflower garden bloomed in defiant colors under the streetlight, every petal a small victory waiting for the war to end. The next morning, our kitchen became mission control for what Patricia called Operation Wildflower Justice. By 8 a.m., we had assembled what looked like the world's most unlikely legal team around our breakfast table. Patricia sat at the head with her laptop and 3 legal pads covered in her precise handwriting. Frank brought his military-issued organizational skills and a manila folder thick as a phone book. Sarah showed up with her smartphone, a portable printer, and the kind of social media expertise that makes millennials dangerous when properly motivated. The smell of Patricia's famous coffee cake mixed with printer ink and righteous indignation as we mapped out our 3-pronged attack strategy. First priority, Patricia announced, spreading documents across our table like battle plans. We restore the HOA's legal standing properly. Frank, you're going to be our new president. Frank nearly choked on his coffee. Ma'am, I just want to grow tomatoes in peace. And you will. But first, we need someone with integrity to rebuild this organization from scratch. Someone who's actually served his community instead of serving himself. That's when Patricia explained Colorado's HOA restoration process. Any dissolved homeowner association can be revived by filing articles of incorporation with the Secretary of State, paying back fees, and holding proper elections with adequate notice to all residents. It's actually simpler than most people think, which probably explains how Brenda got away with ignoring it for so long. The legal technicality that most folks miss is buried in Colorado Revised Statutes 38 to 33.3, 117. When an HOA's corporate status dissolves, any covenants requiring membership in a corporation become temporarily unenforceable until proper legal standing is restored. Brenda hadn't just been collecting illegal fees, she'd been enforcing rules she had no authority to enforce. Second priority, Patricia continued, we freeze those accounts and recover our neighbors' money. Sarah, this is where your documentation skills become crucial. Sarah had been quietly building a database on her laptop, cross-referencing every violation notice with bank deposit dates and amounts. Her background in social media marketing meant she understood data tracking better than most forensic accountants. Every fee Brenda collected, every threat she made, every discriminatory comment had been logged with timestamps and screenshots. I've got 3 years of Nextdoor posts where she complained about certain types of people not understanding community standards, Sarah said, scrolling through her files. Plus, Ring doorbell footage from 6 different neighbors showing her taking photos without permission. The financial recovery part required calling in favors from Patricia's courthouse network. Her friend Jennifer had connected us with a civil attorney who specialized in HOA fraud cases. Turns out, homeowners who've been illegally assessed can recover triple damages under Colorado consumer protection laws, plus attorney fees. Third priority, Patricia said, her voice taking on that courtroom authority tone. We make sure this never happens to anyone else in any neighborhood. This was the part where Patricia's judicial experience became invaluable. She'd seen enough small-time criminals to know that people like Brenda don't usually limit their schemes to one location. A quick search of business licensing records revealed that Thornfield Property Solutions had consulting contracts with 4 other HOAs across Colorado Springs. Frank leaned back in his kitchen chair, the same chair where he'd probably planned military operations 40 years ago, and grinned. You're talking about taking down a whole network of these parasites. I'm talking about following the evidence wherever it leads, Patricia corrected, and making sure every homeowner in Colorado knows their rights. Sarah's eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm that makes social media campaigns go viral. I can create a resource website, HOA rights, legal procedures, warning signs of fraud, make it searchable by neighborhood. The humorous part of our planning session came when we realized we were essentially organizing a neighborhood watch against our own neighborhood watch president. Frank suggested we call ourselves the Covenant Enforcement Committee, which made Patricia laugh so hard she nearly spilled coffee on her legal documents. But the real genius of Patricia's strategy was the timeline. Instead of rushing to expose Brenda immediately, we were going to let her keep digging her own grave while we built an airtight case. Every violation notice she issues from now on adds another count to the fraud charges, Patricia explained. Every dollar she tries to collect becomes additional evidence. Every discriminatory comment gets documented by people who now know what to look for. By noon, we had filed the Articles of Incorporation to restore Willowbrook Estates HOA as a legitimate organization. Frank was officially our interim president pending proper elections. Sarah had created a private Facebook group for affected neighbors to share evidence safely. And Patricia? She was preparing for the kind of legal showdown that would make Brenda wish she'd stuck to selling overpriced houses instead of terrorizing neighborhoods. The taste of victory was already sweet on our tongues, mixed with the lingering flavor of coffee cake and the satisfaction of good people finally fighting back. Brenda didn't take losing control gracefully. Within 48 hours of our kitchen war council, she launched what military folks would call a scorched earth campaign. If she was going down, she was determined to take everyone with her, starting with Patricia's reputation. The first salvo came in the form of a formal complaint to the Colorado Commission on Judicial Discipline. 3 pages of single-spaced accusations claiming Patricia was using her judicial position to intimidate a dedicated volunteer and create an unfair advantage in civil disputes. She accused Patricia of judicial bias, conflict of interest, and my personal favorite, weaponizing the legal system for personal gain. The complaint landed on Patricia's desk at the courthouse on Wednesday morning. She read it during her lunch break, then calmly filed it in what she calls her "People Who Don't Understand How the Legal System Works" folder. "Marcus," she told me that evening while deadheading her resilient wildflowers, "Brenda just made her biggest tactical error. She's challenged a sitting judge on procedural grounds without understanding basic judicial ethics." But Brenda wasn't finished. Thursday brought a private investigator. I was replacing a sprinkler head in our front yard when a guy in a cheap suit started taking photos of our house from his car. Not subtle photos, the kind where he held his camera up to the window like he was documenting a crime scene. When I waved and started walking toward him, he drove off fast enough to leave rubber on the pavement. Sarah's Ring doorbell caught him that afternoon, creeping around Patricia's judicial parking space at the courthouse. By evening, Frank's veteran network had identified him as Gary Kellner, a bottom-feeder PI who specialized in domestic investigation services and had a reputation for taking cases legitimate investigators wouldn't touch. The harassment escalated to personal attacks by Friday. Anonymous flyers started appearing on car windshields throughout our neighborhood, featuring a grainy photo of Patricia in her judicial robes with headlines like, "Corrupt Judge Living Among Us," and "Is Your Neighbor Above the Law?" The typography looked like it came from a 1980s conspiracy newsletter, complete with dramatic fonts and excessive exclamation points. But the real low point came Saturday morning. I was loading mulch into our truck at the garden center when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "That's the husband, the judge's husband. They think they're better than everyone else." Brenda was standing 2 aisles over, talking loudly to anyone who would listen about the corrupt judicial family that was destroying property values and bringing crime to our peaceful neighborhood. She'd positioned herself near the checkout line where the maximum number of people would hear her performance. The woman had graduated from HOA president to full-time character assassination specialist. That afternoon, Patricia got a call from her court administrator. Someone had filed a complaint claiming she was hearing cases involving parties from our neighborhood, creating conflicts of interest. The complaint was anonymous, but the administrator recognized Brenda's real estate letterhead from previous frivolous filings. "They want me to recuse myself from all municipal cases involving HOAs," Patricia told me, her voice carrying the dangerous calm that defense attorneys learn to recognize. "Every parking dispute, every zoning violation, every small claims case that involves any homeowner association in the entire county." The absurdity was breathtaking. Brenda was essentially demanding that a municipal court judge disqualify herself from a significant portion of her docket because one HOA president couldn't handle being caught in systematic fraud. But Sunday night brought the escalation that crossed every possible line. Patricia's 78-year-old mother was visiting from Denver, staying with us for her annual summer visit. Mom was watering the wildflower garden before dinner when Brenda marched across the street like she was leading a cavalry charge. "Excuse me," Brenda announced, startling Mom so badly she dropped the watering can. "You need to tell your daughter to stop this harassment immediately." My mother-in-law, bless her heart, looked at this perfectly coiffed suburban terrorist and said, "I'm sorry, dear, do I know you? I'm the HOA president, and your daughter is destroying our community with her vindictive legal attacks. As her mother, you have a responsibility to control her behavior." Control her behavior. like Patricia was a misbehaving teenager instead of a sitting judge. Frank happened to be walking his dog and witnessed the entire encounter. By the time I got outside, Mom was shaking, not from fear, but from pure rage at being told to control her accomplished daughter by someone who'd been stealing from neighbors. That night, Patricia sat at our kitchen table reviewing judicial ethics guidelines while Mom told the story for the fourth time, getting angrier with each retelling. The smell of Mom's stress-baking chocolate chip cookies mixed with Patricia's determination to end this once and for all. "She just threatened an elderly woman to get to me," Patricia said quietly. "That's not legal strategy. That's desperation. And desperate people, as any experienced judge knows, make the worst possible decisions under pressure." Monday morning brought Brenda's nuclear option, a federal lawsuit. The certified letter arrived at Patricia's courthouse office thick as a novel and twice as dramatic. Thornfield v. Blackwood, civil rights violation under color of law, was emblazoned across legal paperwork that must have cost more than most people's monthly rent. Brenda was suing Patricia in federal court for violating her civil rights by using judicial authority to intimidate a private citizen engaged in lawful HOA governance. She demanded monetary damages, injunctive relief, and Patricia's removal from the bench for constitutional violations and abuse of power. The lawsuit was legal nonsense wrapped in official-looking formatting like putting a bow tie on a garbage truck and calling it formal transportation. But nonsense or not, federal civil rights claims require responses, and responses require time Patricia should have been spending on legitimate court business. "She's trying to bury me in paperwork," Patricia explained over dinner, gesturing at the stack of legal documents with her fork. "Force me to spend thousands on defense attorneys while she plays victim in federal court." But Brenda's masterstroke of stupidity came Tuesday afternoon when she decided to take her campaign directly to Patricia's workplace. I was replacing brake pads in our garage when Patricia called, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Marcus, you need to get down to the courthouse, now!" I arrived to find Brenda standing in the municipal court lobby with a homemade sign reading, "Corrupt Judge Blackwood, where is justice?" She'd positioned herself directly in front of the security checkpoint where every defendant, attorney, and court employee had to see her one-woman protest. The lobby smelled like industrial disinfectant and decades of legal anxiety, but today it carried an extra tang of secondhand embarrassment as court personnel tried to ignore the middle-aged woman having a public breakdown 20 feet from active courtrooms. "This judge uses her position to terrorize innocent homeowners," Brenda announced to anyone within earshot. "She thinks she's above the law. Where's the accountability?" Court security had called Patricia's chambers, who'd called the chief judge, who'd called me because they couldn't legally remove someone from a public courthouse lobby without cause, even if that someone was making a spectacle that would embarrass a reality TV show. That's when Detective Ray Kowalski walked through the security checkpoint for his afternoon testimony in an unrelated case. Ray had appeared before Patricia's bench probably 50 times over the past 3 years. Domestic violence cases, DUI arrests, minor drug possession charges, the routine parade of municipal court business that keeps small cities functioning. He knew Patricia as the fair, methodical judge who never let personal feelings interfere with legal proceedings. He also knew crazy when he saw it. "Ma'am," Ray said in his professional cop voice, approaching Brenda's impromptu protest, "is there a problem here?" "Yes, there's a problem." Brenda whirled around, sign wobbling. "This corrupt judge is using her position to persecute me for doing my job as an HOA president." Ray glanced at the sign, then at the courthouse security cameras recording everything, then back at Brenda. "And you are?" "Brenda Thornfield, president of Willowbrook Estates HOA. That woman," she pointed dramatically toward the courtroom doors, "is hearing cases that directly benefit her personal vendetta against my community leadership." The beautiful thing about courthouse lobbies is that they're designed for maximum acoustic clarity. Every word of Brenda's rant was carrying into adjacent courtrooms, where attorneys were probably wondering if someone had accidentally broadcast a daytime soap opera over the intercom system. Ray pulled out his notebook, the same one he used for actual crime scenes. "What specific cases has Judge Blackwood heard that involve you personally?" "Well, I mean, she hasn't heard any yet, but she could. It's the potential for bias that matters." "So you're protesting a judge for cases she hasn't heard involving matters that haven't happened?" Brenda's face cycled through several interesting colors as she realized she'd just described her federal lawsuit to a police detective in language that made it sound exactly as frivolous as it actually was. But the real mini-twist came when Ray asked for her identification and ran her name through the system during what he later described as routine verification of a potential disturbance complainant. Turns out, Brenda had 3 unpaid parking tickets and a bench warrant for failure to appear on a speeding violation from 6 months ago. The same municipal court system she was protesting had issued a warrant for her arrest that she'd been ignoring while filing federal lawsuits about judicial corruption. The irony was so thick you could have served it with coffee and called it dessert. "Ma'am," Ray said, his voice taking on the formal tone that means someone's day is about to get significantly worse. "I need you to come with me." Brenda's homemade protest sign hit the courthouse floor with a pathetic cardboard slap as Ray explained that her outstanding warrant required immediate resolution, either through posting bond or spending the evening as a guest of the county jail system. The taste of justice was finally getting sweet enough to savor. 3 days later, Brenda made the phone call that would end her reign of suburban terror forever. I was pressure washing our driveway when Patricia's phone rang inside the house. Through our open kitchen window, I could hear her voice shift from casual conversation to professional alertness in about 3 seconds. "Yes, this is Judge Blackwood." "What? Are you certain?" "No, officer. I'll be right there." Patricia appeared in our doorway, car keys already in hand, wearing that expression she gets when someone's about to learn why lying to judges is a bad life choice. "Brenda just called 911, she said, unable to suppress a slight smile. "She's reporting me for destroying community property and demanding my immediate arrest for vandalism." The community property in question? My wife's wildflower garden. The same native Colorado plants that had started this whole mess 3 months ago, now blooming in defiant splendor despite Brenda's chemical warfare attempts. Apparently, Brenda had convinced herself that since she was the HOA president and the HOA governed community standards, and the garden violated her interpretation of community standards, then the garden technically belonged to the community, and Patricia was destroying it by continuing to tend flowers she'd planted in her own yard. The logic was so twisted it could have been used to teach philosophy students about the dangers of circular reasoning. I grabbed my phone and called Frank. "You need to get over here now and bring everyone." By the time the squad car arrived, half our neighborhood had materialized on sidewalks and front lawns like we'd all received the same supernatural summons. Frank stood on our driveway with his arms crossed, looking like a retired drill sergeant ready to defend democracy. Sarah had positioned herself strategically with her phone camera because she understood that moments like this needed documentation. Even Mrs. Peterson from Pine Street had shuffled over with her walker, determined not to miss whatever was about to happen. The police cruiser rolled up slowly, probably because Officer Ray Kowalski could see the crowd gathering and wanted to assess the situation before stepping into what looked like a neighborhood uprising. The morning air carried the sweet scent of Patricia's lavender border mixed with the anticipation of community justice finally being served. Brenda stood on her manicured lawn wearing a pressed business suit at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday, holding a folder thick as a municipal code book and pointing at Patricia like she was identifying a suspect in a lineup. "There she is," Brenda announced as Ray stepped out of his cruiser. "The woman who's been systematically destroying our community property in defiance of lawful HOA authority." Ray looked at Patricia, who was kneeling peacefully beside her columbines in faded jeans and a gardening shirt, trowel in one dirt-covered hand. Then he looked at Brenda, who was vibrating with righteous indignation in her power suit. Then he looked at the growing crowd of neighbors, all of whom were staring at Brenda like she'd just announced her intention to declare war on gravity. "Ma'am," Ray said in his most professional voice, "can you explain exactly what crime is being committed here? Destruction of community property, violation of HOA covenants, defiance of lawful authority." Brenda waved her folder like it contained the Constitution itself. Ray walked slowly toward Patricia, who stood up and brushed dirt from her knees with the dignity of someone who'd never doubted that truth eventually wins over theatrics. "Your Honor," he said, and those 2 words hit the morning air like a judge's gavel. The effect on our gathered neighbors was immediate and electric. Mrs. Peterson's mouth fell open. Sarah's phone camera never wavered, but her eyes went wide. Even Frank, who'd known about Patricia's profession for months, stood a little straighter. But the effect on Brenda was absolutely devastating. Her pointing finger froze mid-accusation. The folder slipped from her suddenly nerveless grip, scattering papers across her perfect lawn like legal confetti. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, producing no words but plenty of strangled squeaks. Your Honor, she finally managed. Your Judge Patricia Blackwood, Colorado Municipal Court, Patricia said calmly, extending her dirt-covered hand to Ray, who shook it with the respect due to someone he'd worked with professionally for 3 years. The crowd murmur started low and built like distant thunder. Whispered conversations, nervous laughter, the sound of people realizing they'd been witnessing David versus Goliath, except David had been wearing judicial robes under her gardening clothes the entire time. "Ma'am," Ray said to Brenda, his voice carrying the kind of patience usually reserved for people experiencing obvious mental health episodes. "Are you filing a complaint that a municipal court judge is gardening in her own yard?" Brenda's face went through more color changes than a traffic light having an electrical malfunction. The HOA, my authority. Then Frank stepped forward, his veteran's voice cutting through the morning air like a command. "Officer, this woman has been stealing money from our neighborhood for 2 years." The dominoes fell faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. Within 48 hours of Ray's impromptu arrest, Brenda had resigned from every HOA position she held, not just in our neighborhood, but across all 4 communities where Thornfield Property Solutions had been consulting. Her federal lawsuit against Patricia was dismissed with prejudiced legal speak for "don't ever bring this ridiculous nonsense to court again." The Colorado Attorney General's office moved with surprising speed once the media picked up the story. Turns out nobody likes headlines about suburban tyrants stealing from retirees, especially during an election year. Brenda pled guilty to theft, fraud, and filing false police reports. She received 3 years probation, full restitution to every affected homeowner, and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in Colorado. The restitution checks were almost as satisfying as watching her perp walk, though Frank insisted the real victory was when his tomato plants won first prize at the county fair 3 months later. We held our first legitimate HOA election that October, with proper notice and actual ballots instead of Brenda's usual, all in favor raise your hand while I'm not looking method. Frank won president unanimously, though he spent his acceptance speech complaining that he'd never wanted the job in the first place. Sarah became our treasurer, mostly because she was the only person under 60 who understood spreadsheets. The recovered funds, almost $34,000 including interest and penalties, transformed our neighborhood. We established a community garden where Brenda's former consultation fees helped neighbors grow vegetables, herbs, and flowers that actually belonged in Colorado soil. The scent of fresh basil and tomatoes now mingles with Patricia's wildflowers every summer morning, a living reminder that communities thrive when people work together instead of against each other. Frank donated part of his military pension to create the Willowbrook Educational Scholarship, helping local kids study law, public service, or agricultural sciences. 3 recipients so far, including Sarah's daughter, who wants to become a civil rights attorney after watching her mom fight back against discrimination. But the crown jewel was our first annual Wildflower Festival, held exactly 1 year after Brenda's arrest. The sound of children's laughter mixed with bluegrass music as Patricia's garden served as the centerpiece, surrounded by booths featuring native plant societies and Frank's famous military-grade barbecue that could smell from 3 blocks away. More importantly, we'd rebuilt something Brenda's reign had nearly destroyed, the simple pleasure of neighbors actually caring about each other. Kids play in streets without fear of violation notices. Elderly residents plant memorial gardens in peace. Young families display decorations that reflect their actual heritage instead of beige conformity. Patricia's wildflower garden became a state landmark, featured in Colorado Gardening Magazine and studied by universities researching native plant restoration. The irony wasn't lost that Brenda's property value destruction actually increased home values by 15% as word spread about our inclusive, well-managed community. The legal precedent helped other Colorado neighborhoods fight similar fraud. The state legislature passed the Thornfield Accountability Act, requiring stronger HOA oversight. Patricia speaks at judicial conferences nationwide, always emphasizing that justice works best when applied fairly to everyone. Last month, a new resident asked Frank about our reputation for being drama-free and well-managed. Frank grinned, the taste of his morning coffee mixing with satisfaction. "Drama-free? We had enough drama to last through retirement. Difference is, we got rid of the person causing it." As for Brenda, she moved to Arizona where she's already been cited for pool violations and aggressive behavior toward maintenance staff. Some people never learn. Here's your takeaway. Always request proof your HOA filed required state paperwork before paying disputed fines. Document everything with timestamps and photos. Know that discriminatory enforcement patterns can trigger federal investigations. Most importantly, find your community's frank someone willing to stand up when bullies think clipboards make them kings. Your HOA horror stories help others recognize warning signs and fight back. Drop your worst nightmare in the comments below. We read every single one and feature the craziest stories in future episodes. Subscribe to HOA Stories and ring that notification bell if you believe good neighbors beat petty tyrants every time. We've got dozens more tales of justice served suburban style, including next week's episode about the parking enforcer who tried to ticket the new transportation director's car while she was standing right there watching. Community justice tastes sweeter than Patricia's wildflower honey, and that's saying something.
You've been watching HOA Stories, where entitled Karens get a reality check. If this episode gave you secondhand rage or satisfaction, hit that like, leave your take in the comments, and subscribe so you're the first in line for more weekly HOA chaos.